Everybody. My name is Janice Sherwood. I am the founder of the Fight ALD Foundation, and I'm very happy to be here hosting this segment of the ALD Connect Bootcamp for Cerebral ALD Families and this life after leaving the hospital. Along with me, I have Amber Salzman with Stop ALD and Jesse Torrey, who has a son who's gone through transplant and has a very wonderful story to share with us as well. I'm going to read a disclaimer to start with. This webinar is for informational purposes only. The discussion is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Or are ill or suspect that you are ill, seek professional medical attention immediately. ALD Connect does not recommend or endorse any specific physicians, treatments, procedures, or products, even though they may be mentioned on this webinar. We also would like to thank, on behalf of ALD Connect, Bluebird Bio for sponsoring this boot camp and making this available to Landscape Project. So we're going to start off with Amber Salzman's story.
Thanks, Janice. And again, I also really do appreciate sponsorship of Bluebird and appreciate people taking time today. And whatever I say today, I am totally available afterwards for questions and, not just now, anytime. Look, this is a journey that we all go through and you need people on that journey with you. I am totally here for you for that. So just as a backdrop to before leaving the hospital, just so that you have the context in terms of when my son was transplanted. My oldest nephew was diagnosed, very similar story to many, unfortunately too late, and we lost Oliver. But at the time he was diagnosed, my son was 1. So we monitored him. And when he was 2, along with another nephew that was pre-symptoms. And when my nephew had his first when my son had his first tiny lesion, we went in for transplant. So I know we won't talk, my part is not to talk about while we're going through it, but more when we go home. And I will say every transplant team has their own special recipe. So what I say will apply to a situation where he was treated at Duke and then we went home. It may be different if you're treated at another institution. They each kind of have their own recipe in terms of treatment and post-treatment. So in my son's case, it was startling to hear the physician say, oh, he did so well, knowing that he went through hell. And there were several times when we thought we may lose him and just the pain everything went through. But overall, look, I mean, he's now a healthy 21-year-old. So when we left Duke and came back home, we live in Philadelphia. Before you leave, during the procedure, in his case and in most cases, you get a Hickman line, which is basically you get IV tubes put really close into near your heart so that when they pump in meds, they can get it through your systemic delivery in the most efficient way because you just, your veins just can't take all of that. So you have a Hickman line. Before you go home, and you manage that while you're in the hospital in terms of you have to clean it and dress it frequently. In his case, because when we were ready to come back to Philadelphia, because he was in good enough shape where he didn't need continuous access, we did surgery to put a port in. So basically he had, I'm trying to point where it was in his shoulder, and it's basically something that's underneath the skin. But if you have to access it, you can quickly put a syringe in and access it, and that goes into the circulatory system. So that's how he went home. But at least then he, could take a shower without all the Hickman line fear, etc. So he was at that point about 2.5. And when we brought him home, we just had him on a very rigorous meds in terms of making sure that he still had, we kept him immunosuppressed so that the host and the graft could learn to live together and therefore eventually be medication free. But your body sort of has to be immunosuppressed while you learn to accept the donor cells. So we brought him home and had our whole regimen of medicine and seemed to be doing very well. Of course, we had our local physician here that was in communication so that if there were any issues, they could check back with the team at Duke. There was a team at CHOP that we were referred to here. The other thing, which I think everyone's going to have to deal with differently, is the fact that he was immunosuppressed. And now this was pre-pandemic, so I think now we're all kind of used to masks and being careful, but this was pre-pandemic, so it was even a little bit more challenging, is that because he was immunosuppressed, we really couldn't afford to have him play with any kids or otherwise who could potentially pass something on, because in his case, being immunosuppressed, it could be devastating. So it was challenging because you wanted to get him back into a normal real life, but you didn't want to expose him unnecessarily to potentially something that could be devastating and even fatal, unfortunately, because he was immunosuppressed. So in terms of the house itself, everything, people had to take their shoes. When I say people, there weren't many people coming in. My parents actually, at the time, they didn't live very far. As long as they were completely healthy, they could come over and they would take their shoes off, everything, wash your hands, all the food that came in. Now, again, because we're post-pandemic, I think people have lived through a bit of this. Back then, it was a lot more foreign. Certain foods, we had to be careful to make sure there was no way that he could accidentally be hit with some virus or bacteria. There was one family who lived nearby who, he's still friends with them. It's great. A boy who is single child, same age, and his parents totally understood what the risks were. And they said, look, we can have them play together. If our son has any kind of sniffles, like, we're not doing him a favor having him have a play date if he's going to get him sick. So my son and Sasha would play together out on the swing set or outside. And that was basically the only child that he was playing with until he got his immune system back. So that went on for, oh God, it was probably like 6 to 9 months. And I mean, just fast forward, they're both in college, different colleges, but still friends. They just saw each other recently as they're both home. It's a little bit unnerving because you have to say no to people who want to come over, well-intended, bring you something, hang out with you, give you some relief of taking care of your child, but you just can't expose them. And you just have to say, look, this isn't personal. We can't do that. And that was something that we did have to deal with. But eventually, he could, and he had a N95 mask, of course, just whenever he went out, because he did still have to go into CHOP and he was doing some PT to get back in shape. Anytime he left, N95, anytime he was playing with kids, N95. And then when he was about 3.5, he did go back into preschool, and everything went well since then. So we did access the port eventually when about 9 months post coming home, when the thought was that he was relatively stable, they were okay taking the port out. So he now has, we were joking about the other day, he's got a nice scar here, some scars here, a few other scars, but and he's like, should I do anything about it? I'm like, nah, it's manly. I mean, so you just, in the scheme of things, like, you're just happy that you can make it through. And just fast forward now, the only thing that as a carryover, of course, is he's adrenally insufficient. So he is rigorous about taking his meds to make sure that he doesn't fall into any kind of adrenal crisis. So he's been pretty healthy. And just on the entertaining side of, because you have to laugh when you are living with ALD and you find ways to laugh. He finished his sophomore year before when the pandemic. So he took off this last year and was actually a ski instructor out of Big Bear in California. And we were talking and he said, I have to live with limits because I'm sick. And I'm like, Spencer, you're not sick. He goes, no. You and Dad raised me to think that I'm healthy and I can live a life like anyone else. He's like, but I can't. And I said, what do you mean? I mean, because to me, you take corticosteroids, like, he lives a normal life, big deal, you pop a pill. And he said, well, and there's a 21-year-old guy. He said, well, my friends brag to me how they get so wasted on booze that they have to get their stomachs pumped and then they can make it to class the next day. He's like, I can't do that because I'm adrenally insufficient. I said, so that's your regret, that you have limitations, that you can't get so wasted on alcohol that you have your stomach pumped. I said, I can live with that. I hope if you want me to send you to therapy to deal with that. And he's like, no, I think I'm okay. It was just that idea of having limits. So the only reason I say that is like in the scheme of things, like you laugh about it, you get past it. And, he's leading a healthy, normal life. And he's still friends with the people that kind of went through it with us when he was terribly immunosuppressed. So I'll stop there. And if there's any, I don't know, Janice or Jesse, if there's anything you think I should hit upon.
I thought that was great, Amber. I love that story. Our story is a little different. Should I go ahead and start? Okay, I've got the head shake. My son, Jack, was diagnosed in 2007. Actually the same day that Evan was diagnosed. And he had a transplant a month later, 14 years ago. And I do need to say that this was a late diagnosis, and it was 14 years ago. The diagnosis was very different 14 years ago. The treatments are far better, and with newborn screening, it's the momentum is there to change the face of this disease. But 14 years ago, we had never heard of this disease, and suddenly we were thrown into it. When we got home, it was 79 days after we had left to go in for transplant, and we were going home to a very different life. Because Jack's disease was fairly far progressed going into transplant, he lost quite a lot during our time in the hospital. And so we had taken him to the hospital. He was acting odd, quirky, chewing on things, but he pretty much was a typical kid. When we brought him home, he had lost his ability to speak. He had a central line and a G-tube, could not care for himself at all. So it took us a while to adjust to our new lives. Jack had a bunk bed, and my husband and I took turns every night sleeping on the top bunk because we were so scared that something would happen. And since he had lost his ability to speak, he couldn't call out to us. It took us a while before we were able to let him be alone at night. He also was on 8 or 9 different medications that we would give him either through an IV or through his G-tube. It was 48 different doses a day. I was a photographer and an art teacher before this, not a doctor, not a nurse. And it was kind of crazy that they trusted me to do this. And I don't really know how I got through it, but it's amazing what you do when you love somebody. And we did get through that. And now Jack's just like a lot of our boys, just on steroids, maintenance dose. On top of him being medically fragile, his life is very complicated to this day. So another thing we needed to do was to deal with schools to figure out how we were going to educate our boy. When he was diagnosed, he was in the middle of 2nd grade, and going into transplant, I was so focused on the fact he was going to miss the last couple months of 2nd grade, and how on earth was he going to catch up? Seems kind of silly now because he ended up needing schools for children with multiple disabilities until he graduated last year. But dealing with schools for whatever issues your child is having is really important, because all children are required to be instructed the way they need. And sometimes that means having a one-on-one aid or having services within a typical school. speech therapy, occupational therapy can be provided. So it's important to consider that. As far as, oh, and then we also had another child. So we were not just worried about Jack and how he was doing, but Anna was 6 turning 7 at the time that her brother was going through all this. So we were trying to create kind of a normal feel to our lives under these really extraordinary circumstances. As far as advice I would give everyone post hospital stay is when friends and family offer help, take them up on it. Have a list of ways to answer that question, how can I help? For us, we had a cooler on our back deck that every day at 5 o'clock, somebody would come and deliver us a meal. It went on really far longer than we needed, but for us, it was lovely not to have to worry about that one little thing, what's for dinner. And for our friends, it was a way they could be part of our journey, because we couldn't, as Amber said, we couldn't entertain, we couldn't see a lot of people. But that way, the love arrived at 5 every day. It was wonderful. Our dog was never walked more than that year post-transplant, because neighbors were constantly coming over to take care of the dog. So I encourage everyone to think of things that would make life a little easier and allow others to do it. So I'm trying to think. We did beg our doctors to go home, probably a little earlier than we should have. I wish I had trusted them and perhaps waited a few more days or weeks, because it was a huge amount of responsibility. And we just lost Janice. We were gonna move on to Janice in a minute. Hopefully she'll log back on. But allow yourselves to also realize that this is a challenging time, and forgive yourself for the frustration you might be feeling, anger you might be feeling, because it's a hard journey, no matter what the outcome. And I'm not sure how to move forward now, because Janice was supposed to.
Yeah, because unfortunately she lost Sawyer. I'm wondering if in the meantime, if we should address questions, and then when she joins, she'll talk about her experience. Kath, we see a question, did anything surprise us about coming home? I'll let you, Jesse, if you want to first answer.
It was all a surprise. We really had left for transplant thinking that our lives post-transplant would mirror the lives that we had grown accustomed to living. And it was so different. And it really took years before we accepted it, and a few more years until we embraced it. And our lives now are quite good. They don't look like our peers necessarily, but Jack's doing well. He's happy. Our marriage stayed together. Our daughter is thriving. So it's good. It's good. Janice is back, and you're going to tell us the story of Sawyer.
Yeah, sorry, my internet just decided to crash. But I got it back. So thank you very much, Jesse and Amber. You both have really wonderful, compelling stories, and your action and advocacy is really respected. And my story is quite a bit different. In 2003, my son Sawyer ended up in a children's hospital situation. And it was ultimately because of an adrenal crisis, which nobody seemed to get a handle on for at least a week. He was in a medicated coma. And then on day 12, we were told of the diagnosis of adrenal leukodystrophy, and we're told to just take him home and make him comfortable and make memories, that there was absolutely nothing that we could do. I didn't like that answer, so I started reaching out to people that were specialists in the field for adrenal leukodystrophy, which I found through the internet, and started looking into bone marrow, even though it wasn't recommended by the doctor in the hospital. But the neurologist in the hospital that diagnosed him had only seen one other patient before, and that patient did not survive. So I wasn't really confident in using his advice. So we went to the Orange County Children's Hospital and met with their transplant team on the condition that they would communicate with Charlie Peters, who was the head of transplant at the University of Minnesota at the time. And they agreed that they would go through the protocol that he laid out. And so we started with neuropsych testing for Sawyer. And unfortunately, right after one of those, he was completely distraught over the situation because he couldn't figure out why he was having to go through these. He had another disease.
Oh, no. First, hopefully Janice's internet will come back.
Kathleen is going to send us some more questions.
Okay.
Feel free to write them in the chat if you have any. Were there any surprises for you, Amber, when you got it?
Yeah, and I guess everybody, it's like a new normal, and you sort of just have to adapt to your new life, and everybody handles it different. You know, my sister lost her oldest. Her second was coming back from transplant, and she was dealing with all of that. And then, you know, like Jessie, she had another child, healthy, who you also had to make sure he was living a normal life. And what amazed me is she never got angry. And I don't know, like when my sister would say, why are you angry? I don't know. I was just angry. Like, I don't know at who, at what, but I was just angry. And it took me a while to get past that. And I will say some of the surprises is what things set me off. Like I remember when my son was back in preschool, and one of the parents was complaining and bemoaning that her kid had the sniffles. And I just I had to walk away. I was like, are you freaking kidding me? That's what you're worried about? And those kind of reactions, like I didn't think I was that person. And you have to forgive yourself and just say, like, you've been through, you know, I mean, I didn't get into the horrible moments where we thought we were going to lose him in the hospital. And, you know, you're just so relieved to be able to take him home. So I think that was a little bit of the surprise. And so that was one thing. And also I was surprised that when I actually started to feel happy sometimes, that I felt guilty about it.
Yes.
And was very fortunate, and I'll call out the person who helped me, was Leslie Yamada. She happens to be the wife of the person I worked with at GSK, a very gracious, wonderful woman. She had lost her brother many years before as an adult. And I said, I just feel guilty being happy. Like, I should be sad. I lost my nephew. Look at all this horror I see around me. And she's like, no, it's totally okay. You can be happy and sad, and that's all normal feelings. So there's a lot of that when you come home, just like emotions that you didn't think you would ever have and you feel guilty about. And you just have to embrace it and be grateful for what you have. And I got a lot out of being there to help others as well. Everybody has different ways to cope with it. And I think Jessie's right to point out that her marriage survived, because a lot of marriages do not. And part of it is understanding that the day that you're feeling really badly, your spouse or your family may be like ready to say, move on. And the day that you're ready to move on, they're feeling badly. So just that kind of embrace the moment and, you know, take it all in. So I think those were the surprises. Like I was sort of like, oh, I can handle anything. I can do it. Like we got him through transplant. We got you know, we got so much done, but you're always surprised by some new emotion. And I think that's one thing where you just have to be kind to ourselves.
It's true. And I really do think 14 years ago, it was very hard. I was fortunate to find Gina and a few other mothers, but it was much harder to find our community. It's way easier now. And I really think people need to, support each other and be there for each other, because we're the folks that get this.
So what I was saying was, we decided not to go through transplant, but I did search out other doctors to see if we could find some sort of a treatment that could slow the progression of his disease. And I ended up educating every doctor that I took him to about what ALD was, which is why I was encouraged to start my foundation to spread awareness about the disease. But what we did do with him was make as many memories as we could. We took him to Mexico because he just loved to boogie and go swimming. So that was a really fun trip. And we went snorkeling. But he was on medication, cortisone, for adrenal insufficiency. So we were all the time, especially snorkeling. There were jellyfish around. So we were freaked out that he might get stung, but unfortunately it was me that got stung. But but that was a great trip. He was doing pretty well at the time. His vision was starting to get pretty sketchy, so we had to, be with him, 24/7. When we got back, his doctor recommended us to make a wish foundation, and they came to the house, and they were a great couple that really understood our situation, and they sent us to Hawaii. A trip for my daughter, who was 10 at the time. Not so great for Sawyer, because by then he couldn't really hear very well or see, so he was very self-conscious of having to be guided around and being able to use a fork to food up and eat, because he couldn't see it. He'd have to hotel room while my husband was out with my daughter in the pool. When we got back from that trip, that was in June. I believe that was June or July, the end of July. By August, we had hospice come in to assist us with his care, so that we didn't have to keep taking him into the hospital. And they would come and give him medications, because he started having pretty bad psychotic episodes that would last like 24 hours, with constantly giving him more medication until he was so doped up that he couldn't really do anything. It was a pretty awful situation. But having hospice there, they sent us to work with my daughter, which was an awesome thing, so that she could kind of be separated from what was going on here. Plus, she was still in school, and I tried to be as active with her in her classes, and we got her into karate, so that she was having some other activities that she could do outside of the house. So I would go to her meets with her. But it was really, it really worked out for my husband and I, that it seemed like when one of us was down, the other one was okay, and vice versa. So we always had somebody who was strong to kind of pull us through all that was going on. But my son did pass away at our house.
It's heartbreaking that the story is heartbreaking, and that she froze in sharing such a beautiful story of everything she did for her son. Amber, should we go through some of these questions?
Sure. So some of them, and hopefully Janice will come back. I mean, my heart goes out. Some of them were around what resources, in retrospect, what would we have liked more of, less of? I guess in my case, which may be different, it was My son had to do a lot of physical therapy, occupational therapy, all that stuff. And I needed to get back to work. So trying to juggle it all. My parents did a lot of driving of him to CHOP for all of that. And in retrospect, there were people that offered, and some were the empty offer, and you can kind of tell, and some really did want to help. I probably should have taken more people saying, could you just take my son to some appointments? Because it's just overwhelming to try to get on with your, hold your job and take him for the appointments and all of that. So I think that would have been one thing. I mean, yes, it is nice when people drop off food, so it's one less thing to worry about. Nowadays, it wasn't back, when our kids were going through this now with Grubhub and all that, you can kind of be a little bit more self-sufficient. So, but the driving your child to an appointment, in retrospect, that's probably something that if people offered, knowing what I know now and knowing that it's a long haul of appointments, I probably would have said, if you can, and we'll schedule it around you, that would be a super help. And if you don't mind wearing an N95 mask when you take them there, and if you have at all any fear of that you're sick, you can cancel last minute, we'll deal with it. So I think that's one thing that where help, at least in our case, would have made a big difference. I don't
The
know.
amount of doctoring post-transplant, no matter what the outcome is, it's extraordinary. We were going, I think, 4 days a week. Jack had his transplant at Columbia Presbyterian, New York, which is about 45 minutes away. And we thought, oh, it's so easy because it's right there. There was nothing, the word easy does not, it wasn't part of our lives for quite a long time. So I think that's great advice. And there are a lot there is a lot of support you can get through your districts. Your son was a bit younger, but a lot of the kids going through transplant are school age, and preparing the district beforehand is something I wish I had done. But I just didn't understand or appreciate what was going on. It all happened so quickly once we got the diagnosis. And there's a question here about siblings. For us, talking to Anna, she was only 6 years old at that time, we tried to be as honest with her as we could be, while keeping it age appropriate and being careful to answer the questions she was asking. But there were very dark days when we were in the hospital and we weren't sure if we were going to be able to bring him home. So being honest is important, but it's difficult too. Janice, welcome back.
This is so frustrating.
Yeah.
Traveling the US is what I was talking about. So I got an RV donated. We plastered it with information about ALD, and I visited over 3,200 medical facilities across 48 states, drove 44,000 miles, spreading awareness about this disease. So upon my return, I helped work with the Myelin Project and Gina Cousineau to get newborn screening in the state of California, and then worked with Amber and quite a few other patient advocacy groups to get it added to the Secretary's recommended uniform screening panel, or the rest. So I've been very active since then, and I know that so many of you who have the diagnosis are getting involved with the community too. So I'd like to thank all of you, because it really does take a village to get the ball rolling. So hopefully we're going to have a lot more progress in the next few years. And that's about it for me.
So Janice, somebody posted that if it helps, I don't know, that if you just do audio and not video, if your network starts to go haywire. I'm not.
I did try calling in, but
All
I
right.
said that I was muted, so I couldn't.
All right.
I couldn't join in.
But but we've so valued your story. So there were some questions here we should probably address. So some of it had to do, I think Jesse answered on how do you prepare siblings. And I think something that I did want to accentuate that Jesse said, especially when they're younger kids, just answer the question and know, like it's kind of like a deposition. Whatever they're asking you, it could be a really simple question. Like you don't have to go into the whole long explanation. Like when, because I'm very close with my sister, and as Oliver was declining, and they'd be like, why is Oliver eating with his hands? And instead of getting into the whole, it's just like, because he can't use his fork. That's really all they want to know. Like, why are they not allowed to eat with their hands? Like it's sometimes there's simple questions, or like if he would act out, which fortunately, when he lost his abilities, he was you hear sometimes angry and violent. He wasn't for the most part. He was always the sweet boy, but he would do things that were unusual. And we would just say, that has to do with how Oliver's brain is wired right now. But there's nothing against you. He loves you. And they just needed some comfort in terms of understanding what was going on, because it was different than what they were seeing other kids.
For
But
Anna, she would constantly ask if when she gets her transplant, would I stay in the hospital with her too? And I would try to explain that girls generally don't become symptomatic and, yada, yada. No, she just needed to know that if anything ever happened to her, we would do the same for her. How about your daughter, Janice? Did she have a difficult time with understanding? And
Well, we told her that what made Sawyer so sick that he had to be in the hospital was still making him sick, but we were doing everything that we could to help him and make him get better. So until we came to the conclusion that there was nothing to do, we stuck with that story. And then I did take her to the park and sat her down and said, Sawyer's not going to make it. She took it pretty well. She's a pretty tough little kiddo. She went through a lot. Herself, she was born with craniosynostosis and went through skull surgery when she was 10 weeks old. So that kind of made her a little tough chick. So
she was 10 years old?
She was 10 when Sawyer passed away. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think some of the other questions, if you guys want to handle, is how it affected some family member. Where was it? How did your family react? Household, extended family, was there a big impact on them?
I had a difficult time. Most of our family's wonderful, but I had a difficult time having them appreciate that they all needed to get tested and explaining the importance of that. To this day, there's still members of the family who haven't, and I find it really frustrating. But generally, our family was supportive and continues to be.
Yeah, my family was very supportive. What did change was our group of friends. Everybody that we were friends with during the time that my son was healthy went away when he got sick, and especially after he passed away. Some of the people that were supporting us while he was ill disappeared after he died. So we have all new friends now. And I'm not the only person. I've talked to other people that had the same experience. They just can't deal with the grief and the emotional toll.
I think it's a lot for people. Jack's friends are very sweet and they still are very kind to him, but it was hard for them. They were in second and third grade, and to understand that the boy that they were running around with 6 months before was wearing diapers and couldn't feed himself. It was hard. And it was hard for me too, because I've watched these kids grow up and go off to college. They're now all graduating college, and things that Jack hasn't been able to do. But we've been fortunate that most of our friends have really helped us along the way. But
I
finding
will
a
say too,
community,
I was in real estate, and the office that I worked at, my broker was awesome. And she got everybody in the office to rotate, bringing us meals, like you were saying, Jesse. So that was a real relief. She also did a campaign throughout the real estate community, Dollar for Sawyer, to get everybody to just donate $1 to help our family cover some of the expenses that our insurance didn't. And also, you know, I mean, one day he could ride his bike and the next he couldn't. So we'd have to find some other activity. So we got him, you know, a skateboard that he could sit on at least and roll around on. And then when he couldn't use that anymore, then we, you know, find something else that he could play with his hands or something. But it was really beneficial to have that support from at least from my community.
I mean, I will say that you hear hurtful things, and the best thing you can do is be very vocal about what you need and don't need. I mean, what I didn't mention, when my son came home, because of all the steroids, his face was swollen. Obviously, he was bald from the chemo treatment, and he had a unibrow from, oh God, I'm forgetting the name of the drug. So, but it's so weird because at the time I thought he was so cute. I look back at these pictures and it was like, I thought he was cute, but I did overhear some people saying what a freak he looked like. I mean, just, you know, he's a good looking 21-year-old, you know, it's all temporary. But like, when you hear that, it stabs you like, mother, it's like, the kid's alive. Like, you're worried about what he looks like? And I had to tell people, like, if that's how you're going to view him, please just, I can't be around you. My family can't be around you. And you just really have to protect you and your family and be very vocal. And I remember, I hope I'm not telling too much, but when my sister, who lost her son and had another son go through transplant, at one point I said to her, like, I'll watch the kid, like, you have to take care of yourself. Like, if you can't feel good about yourself, you can't be for your kids. And she's so wonderful. So she went and got highlights in her hair, and someone made some comment like, your son's dying and you're getting your hair highlighted? Like seriously? But people just don't get it. And you just have to be very vocal and say, like, look, you have to understand, like, that if you're not there, you can't be there for your kids. So a lot of it is just vocalizing, because thank God most people just don't know what it's like to walk in those shoes. And the more you can tell them, and that's one thing, even in retrospect, and I'm a pretty vocal person for when I have to stick up for my family. There were times I would bite my tongue, and in retrospect, I just needed to do it in a polite, respectful way and explain to people what it's like when you're walking through this. Because a lot of people, they just don't know. Like, they're afraid. I mean, I remember my sister saying, like, people would say, oh, I don't want to mention Oliver. She's like, what? Do people not know that I think about him every minute of every day? Like, as if they mention his name, then I'm going to remember that I have a son that died. Of course I remember. But people don't know. And she's so gracious about it. She's like, people just don't know because they don't want to upset you. They don't want to say the wrong thing. So the more you can tell people what helps and what doesn't help, I would just say, find your voice and say what you need to do and say what they can do to help, whether it's taking your kid to a doctor's appointment because it's endless appointments, or just what they can say or not say, what's upsetting, what's supportive. Yeah, I would just say be very vocal about it.
Well, especially when you're taking care of somebody 24/7, you've got to take time for yourself. I mean, you just absolutely have to. The hardest thing that I could do is even just to go to the grocery store by myself, but it was like so liberating that I got out of the house for, 1 hour. But yeah, for anybody to put you down for that, that's just ridiculous.
Yeah, but yeah, you just have to tell them, like, yeah. Are there other questions that we should address?
Gina, somebody had asked about palliative care. I know you did mention, but then you got cut off. You did have hospice at the house, right?
Yes.
And
Hospice,
did you find that helpful?
hospice and palliative care are two separate things, like Gina was referring to, because we did end up going in care after one of his psychotic episodes where he thought he had broken his leg. And it was just more than we could deal with here at the house. So we ended up taking him in, and they were explaining to us that they have people in there that have cancer that get go into remission, but they're in hospice or palliative care during this treatment. So I think you can get hospice whenever you feel like you need it. You don't have to be in the final stages of the disease.
Yeah, I know in our case, our school district also provided, when he was able to, when he got better, like the PT would come to the house, and that was actually I know everywhere you live, it's different, but to get him more into mainstream school, they did support having people come to the house and work with him. So
Teachers come, did tutors come? Oh, well, he was 3.5 when he was transplanted, right?
my son was 2. Well, by the time he got home, he was like 2.5, almost 3. But yeah, so it depended on the age, and like, because they don't have to provide schooling before kindergarten. So it all depends where you live and all that. But it is, I hate to say it, this is where use the community resources, because it's so hard to figure out what your school district, what your healthcare plan, like, I mean, it's expensive, it's grueling, and you just want to make sure that you're leveraging whatever support you should be getting to you from districts and otherwise. And also I mean, someone said that families struggle, any word of advice, just be very communicative of what helps and what doesn't help, because there's a lot of people that it touched me. When I said this, sometimes I felt angry and I don't know why. What also touched me so much is how many people that were totally unaffected by any disease just wanted to help. Like when we were at Duke, we would have these families come in and just bring meals for the people that were stuck in the hospital. Or then you'd have the buddy system at Duke, where college kids, they know that like your child isn't allowed to be in the hospital room by themselves. Like it's not the nurse's job to be there 24/7. So you had to commit to one family member being there. So these buddies would volunteer just so that you'd get like a few hours to go take a shower, wash their clothes, wash their vomit clothes and all that. And when I would talk to them, I'd say, like, why are you volunteering? Like, I thought maybe that somebody in their family was touched. And it was no, just these were college students. They learned that this was a volunteer they could do. And they said, you don't understand. I'm getting just as much out of it as the people I'm helping. So take advantage. There's people that it warms my heart when I think about it. As much as people can be cruel, there's wonderful, generous people. And don't be shy about getting their help. That's the only thing I can say, because it is a struggle, and it's really gratifying when you have people who just out of the kindness of their heart, because they're wonderful, good people, want to help and they feel good about it.
I think researching it beforehand is also really helpful, because you're very tired and overwhelmed at the other side. So knowing what resources are out there in your community and otherwise, just having those phone numbers at the ready so you're prepared.
I don't know if I mentioned it, but the counseling that they provided through the hospice came for a full year for my daughter afterwards. So it's a really good program.
So I know we only have another minute. Any other ones that we should address? I mean, I would just say the fact that anybody who's listening is on the call, you're part of a community. You can't, don't feel alone. You can't, shouldn't say, it's hard to manage this on your own. So leverage other people. We're all trying to help.
And I, like Amber and Janice, people can always find me, and I'm always happy to help, chat, be a shoulder, scream at, whatever people need.
Kathleen just posted too that they have a mentorship program through ALD Connect. So, and we're all available to chat. You can just reach out to us, and share my phone number, and I've counseled a lot of families. So you're not alone. You're not alone in this journey at all.
And I will say, for kids going through it, my son also said, like, if there's anybody he can talk to, he's also there for kids going through it.
That's fantastic.
Jack is there too, but he won't talk to you. But you can see his smiling face, and he tends to make people feel better.
And Jesse, you should tell us all about your book. It's a wonderful book.
I wrote the book, well, I kept a blog the whole time, still do, called Smiles and Duct Tape. And the book Smiles and Duct Tape is really about our time in the hospital and beyond. And I hope it helps other families. Certainly helped me writing it. I always felt that if I could find words to explain what I was going through, it kind of took the poison out of it. Writing and sharing, I recommend. It also helps educate people that may not understand our circumstances.
We are out of time. The next session is about to start. It's taking care of the caretakers with Blythe Lord and Laura Will from the Courageous Parents Network. So I'm looking forward to hearing what they have to tell us. Thank you all for joining in, and we'll be back for the Q&A after the next session.